Scroll through your feed on Instagram or TikTok and you're instantly hit with a sickening wave of loud, performative flexing. It's a carbon copy parade of blinding porcelain veneers against towering glass monoliths, hourly rented red Ferraris and gold Lambos, and chilled champagne flutes overlooking massive, man-made palm islands stamped right into the ocean. For decades now, billions upon billions of marketing dollars have hammered a spotless fairy tale straight into our subconscious. That the United Arab Emirates is the supreme modern miracle, the last true safe haven on Earth where global capital, elite talent, and gorgeous influencers flock without a second thought. We're spoon-fed stories of visionary rulers who took a lifeless sandbox and spun endless petrodollars into a crime-free, zero-tax utopia, where patrol cops cruise in Bugattis and AI fine-tunes every single traffic light. But pierce through that sponsored content for just 1 second. Step out of the ice-cold, oud-drenched lobby of your five-star resort into the dead heat of July, and this billion-dollar mirage melts straight onto the blistering asphalt. You haven't landed in an oasis of tomorrow. You've bought a front-row ticket to the most hostile, unnatural environment on the face of the earth. This place is a brutal, scorched earth wasteland where summer temperatures easily blast past 120 degrees in the shade, and the air hangs so thick, humid, and scalding that drawing a breath feels like inhaling directly from a commercial blast furnace. Nothing here is naturally alive. The landscape is fundamentally dead on arrival. Every single manicured blade of grass and swaying palm frond flanking the freeways of Abu Dhabi or Sharjah is on permanent life support, kept green only by miles of plastic IV tubing, pumping desalinated water straight into their roots round the clock. And where does all that water come from? Massive, hyper-polluting desalination plants, burning millions of barrels of crude and gas every single second just to keep up this green facade, while dumping millions of tons of boiling, super-saline toxic chemical brine right back into the Persian Gulf, suffocating marine life and methodically turning the seabed into an underwater graveyard. This plastic and glass terrarium exists solely by strong-arming the laws of physics and ecology. A giant gilded cage burning unfathomable energy just to keep its wealthy occupants from roasting alive. Daily life here is a frantic, humiliating dash from one AC vent to the next. From a chilled high-rise to an underground garage, into a frozen car, speeding down melting highways, straight into another cavernous, sub-zero shopping mall that serves as a sterile substitute for actual city streets, parks, and public squares. These cities were never built for human feet. They are towering monuments to human arrogance, heavy concrete and polished chrome screaming "new money" while completely discarding human scale and soul. You can shred indoor ski slopes while an apocalyptic heatwave cooks the desert outside, buy literal gold bullion out of vending machines, and sip cappuccinos dusted with 24-karat flakes, but you can't buy a single breath of authentic, living nature. It's hyper-consumerism pushed to its absolute breaking point. A nation that lived in nomadic Bedouin tents and herded camels just half a century ago, suddenly handed an unlimited global credit card and impulsively buying up the gaudiest toys on Earth just to prove its own relevance. Yet you can never shake the sand. That fine, relentless dust creeps into everything, grinding in your teeth, blanketing six-figure supercars, choking air filtration units, and serving as a quiet, menacing reminder of who really owns this ground. The sheikhs can dredge up vanity archipelagos shaped like global continents or crescent moons, sink trillions into keeping the tides from washing their sand castles away, and even shoot chemicals into the clouds to trigger artificial rain, storms that immediately drown their flawless superhighways and international airports because they literally forgot to engineer basic drainage systems. Nature isn't in a rush. It's just biding its time, waiting to reclaim what's hers. Because you cannot stack millions of tons of glass and concrete onto shifting dunes and salt flats forever while laughing at basic geology. The UAE has pulled off the world's most expensive, fragile illusion of absolute control, trying to buy historical permanence and global prestige through raw oil wealth, bringing over starchitects from New York and London to plant the Louvre in the dust, buying up premier football clubs and hiring American pop royalty to whitewash its brutal brand. But behind this blinding golden facade lies an echoing void, a hall of mirrors where history is cooked up by high-priced Madison Avenue agencies, where opulence borders on vulgarity, and where that much-touted safety isn't built on a thriving, free society, but on a merciless digital panopticon and a massive invisible army of modern-day slaves, neatly cropped out of the frame so their suffering never ruins your Instagram aesthetic. Watch any slick tourism ad for this country closely. You'll see spotlessly clean boulevards, deferential service staff, and steel and glass titans piercing the clouds. But what you will never, ever see are the actual men who built this futuristic paradise. They've been airbrushed right out of the official narrative, scrubbed from the broadcast like a smudge ruining a pristine composition for wealthy vacationers. This empire of excess, blinding the world daily, is built squarely on a bedrock of blood, sweat, and absolute, unfiltered 21st century slavery. We're fed PR spin about genius royals conjuring a miracle out of the dead sand. But the brutal truth is that millions of desperate men from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal built it with calloused hands burned black by the sun. Out of the roughly 10 million people living there, only about 1 million hold citizenship, passports, and privilege. The other 90% are an imported, dirt-cheap, and entirely disposable underclass treated like industrial feedstock. And the dark engine driving this massive wealth goes by a sterile name: the kafala system. It's state-sponsored servitude dressed up in the neat legal language of sponsorship. The second a terrified laborer steps off the plane in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, his new employer confiscates his passport. Game over. From that moment on, he ceases to own himself. He is property, a beast of burden stripped of all agency. He cannot quit, he cannot change employers, and he certainly cannot board a flight home without his master's direct permission. The architecture of this scam is flawless. Ruthless recruiters sweep through impoverished Asian villages promising the moon, weaving tales of massive paychecks and an idyllic life by the warm sea. Hooked on that ghost of a dream, entire families sell off their last scrap of land or take on loan shark debt just to buy the kid a one-way ticket. The guy lands to build shiny skyscrapers, gets his papers yanked, and suddenly learns his actual wage is a third of what was promised back home. And he's trapped. He's locked in a steel jaw. The debt back home explodes, leg breakers threaten his family, and he has no choice but to shut up and work until his body breaks. Now, picture the work itself. Just try stepping outside in mid-July when the heat rockets past 120 degrees and the humidity turns the air into a suffocating, boiling stew. These guys are up on scaffolding for 12, sometimes 14 hours straight, with barely a break. The exposed rebar bakes so intensely in that sun that grabbing it without gloves gives you instant third-degree burns. Workers collapse constantly from catastrophic heat stroke. Their overworked hearts literally short-circuit under the inhuman strain. Yet you'll never see accurate workplace mortality stats in their papers. Local authorities coldly sweep these horrific fatalities under the rug, officially logging them as natural causes or cardiac arrest in sleep. To the bosses, a dead worker is just a broken wrench you toss out and replace, knowing the line of desperate replacements stretching back to South Asia never ends. After a shift from hell, these men are packed like sardines into dilapidated, unair-conditioned buses and shuttled miles away from the tourist playground. They are hidden away behind high concrete walls deep in the baking desert. They sleep in stifling, closet-sized rooms, 10 or 12 to a room, stacked on rusty bunk beds. The air is thick with the smell of cheap curry, sour sweat, and suffocating despair. The AC units are usually busted, and swarms of bedbugs crawl the cinderblock walls. These invisible builders endure livestock conditions for years, hoarding every single penny, surviving on bottom-tier rice just to wire an extra dollar back to starving kids. They literally build the most opulent, multi-million-dollar penthouses on Earth with their bare hands. But the second the building is signed off, they aren't even allowed to cross the threshold. The police crush even the faintest murmur of a strike with absolute savagery. If unpaid crews refuse to work because their wages are months overdue, armed riot cops swarm the camp instantly. Organizers get beaten senseless, thrown into horrific black site prisons, and fast-tracked for deportation with a permanent ban. For a guy carrying crushing debt back home, deportation is essentially a death sentence. So they stay quiet. They swallow the razor-sharp construction dust. They endure the beatings and the humiliation from foremen, and they quietly build this fake golden oasis for wealthy expats. This meat grinder extracts every drop of health a man has. A strong young kid arrives full of hope, and 5 or 7 years later, he's shipped back to his village completely shattered. Kidneys failing from chronic dehydration, lungs permanently scarred by toxic cement dust. There is no severance, no medical payout. He's just tossed on the scrap heap like a burned-out gear in a massive state machine. And while American and European tourists excitedly snap selfies in front of dancing, choreographed fountains, they have zero concept that every polished tile beneath their designer shoes is soaked in the blood and sweat of nameless Asian slaves. The Emirates have engineered the most clinically perfect firewall between extreme wealth and extreme poverty on the planet. They've successfully built a society of absolute apartheid and legalized racism, where the color of your passport and the shade of your skin strictly dictate your biological worth. If you're a white American, you're an esteemed expat pulling a massive salary. If you're brown and from a poor Asian country, you are manual labor, explicitly barred from even window shopping in the high-end malls. Meanwhile, the global democratic establishment, the same politicians who love to grandstand at podiums about human rights and equality, blatantly turn a blind eye to this quiet nightmare. Elite Ivy League schools happily cut ribbons on plush satellite campuses there. Blue-chip museums proudly loan out priceless collections. Massive international corporations host their pompous global summits in the high-rises. They all gleefully take the dirty, blood-stained cash and play along with the charade that slavery was eradicated in the 19th century. They luxuriate in the flawless service, thrilled by how fast the iced cocktails arrive and how immaculately their sweets are scrubbed. But this legendary safety and impossible cleanliness relies 100% on the primal terror of millions of ordinary people forced to become voiceless cogs in a machine. Cogs that can be violently swapped out at any second. This is the rotting underbelly of the modern Arabian fairy tale. And without this vast army of captive labor, the entire glass and ambition sandcastle would collapse back into the dunes in weeks, simply because the locals forgot how to work with their own hands decades ago. They only know how to bark orders and count margins. So the next time you stare up in awe at the sheer scale of that mega tower, remember one thing. That needle only pierces the sky because of the broken men left to rot at the absolute bottom of this ruthless food chain. Just take a look at that flawlessly manicured emerald green lawn sprawled right out front of a luxury palace or a so-called 7-star resort. You look at it and genuinely marvel at human ingenuity conquering the harsh elements. But what you're actually staring at is the most arrogant, cynical, and destructive ecological crime scene of our time. We are proudly shown blooming parks plopped right in the middle of scorching sand dunes, and massive golf courses that guzzle tens of millions of gallons of precious fresh water every single day. And we obediently applaud this technological insanity. But the brutal reality is that the UAE is a colossal, insatiable parasite on the body of our planet, bleeding it dry just so a tiny fraction of privileged elites can comfortably sip iced cocktails on a patio at 120 degrees. There are 0 natural rivers here. There are no deep freshwater lakes. This land is entirely missing the one fundamental resource required to sustain biological life: Every drop of that crystal-clear water bubbling in those grandiose choreographed fountains, every drop pouring out of the gold-plated faucets in multi-million-dollar penthouses, is manufactured through a horrific, unnatural industrial process. To keep this plastic paradise from shriveling up and blowing away as dead dust in a matter of weeks, massive industrial desalination plants hum relentlessly along the coast, 24/7, without a single second of downtime. They incinerate an astronomical, logically incomprehensible volume of crude oil and natural gas for the sole purpose of stripping salt from seawater. And where does all that highly concentrated salt go? They continuously dump this heavy, boiling, chemical-laced sludge right back into the Persian Gulf. This thick, toxic brine slowly sinks straight to the ocean floor, mercilessly scorching everything it touches, wiping out ancient coral reefs, triggering mass fish die-offs, and systematically reducing a once-thriving marine ecosystem into a dead, boiling puddle, where soon nothing will survive except toxic algae. Now, pan your drone camera over those famous artificial islands, the iconic palm trees and that archipelago shaped like a map of the world, the ones they love to flaunt in high-end tourism commercials. This is the pure, unfiltered triumph of human stupidity and grotesque hubris. To dredge up these ridiculous sandcastles for bored billionaires and Hollywood A-listers, they deployed armadas of specialized ships that literally scraped the ocean floor down to powder, permanently eradicating the natural habitats of millions of marine creatures. They violently disrupted the natural ocean currents, and now the water trapped between the fronds of those fake palms can't circulate properly. It just sits there, stagnating and rotting in the blistering heat, turning into a fetid, algae-choked swamp that requires constant life support via expensive chemicals and massive underwater pumps. And that grand world archipelago, originally pitched as the ultimate pinnacle of elite luxury, now largely sits completely abandoned. Its empty islands are slowly but surely eroding and sinking back beneath the waves, because the ocean always, absolutely always, reclaims what belongs to it, and it has zero tolerance for a handful of nouveau riche elites trying to redraw the map of the planet with dirty petrodollars. But that's not even the most terrifying part. The truly chilling horror lies in exactly how these people consume power. The Emirates consistently rank at the absolute top of global per capita carbon emissions. Just wrap your head around this surreal nightmare. They built a massive indoor ski resort featuring real, crunchy snow and live penguins squarely in the middle of the baking Arabian desert. It's a direct, cynical spit in the face to the entire global effort of climate conservation. While the rest of the world watches in absolute terror, counting every fraction of a degree of global warming, while developing nations drown in super typhoons and wither under brutal droughts, people here are burning thousands of tons of fossil fuels simply so a rich tourist can snowboard for 30 minutes before stepping out into the brutal heat and climbing into a massive, gas-guzzling V8 SUV. This city cannot physically exist in harmony with nature. It exists in direct defiance of it, surviving only by violating the environment every single day. High-priced starchitects from the US and Europe draft up these insane, all-glass skyscrapers that instantly morph into towering, superheated greenhouses under the Arabian sun. And to keep the people trapped inside those beautiful glass jars from literally boiling alive in 20 minutes, the air conditioning networks have to run on such an insane red-line capacity that they have to keep building brand-new thermal power plants just to feed them. They don't just air-condition residential towers and sprawling office parks. They literally air-condition the outdoors. They blast industrial-grade AC units across open-air cafe patios, desperately trying to freeze the scorching desert wind itself, senselessly torching our shared global future in the process. It's an absolute state-sponsored cult of ecological insanity that is bound to end in a catastrophic collapse. And we are already hearing the first deafening alarm bells of this impending reckoning. You undoubtedly saw that shocking, apocalyptic footage recently, when this pristine, heavily manicured desert was suddenly swallowed by horrific biblical floods. Multi-million-dollar supercars were left helplessly drowning in deep, muddy lakes right in the middle of massive, multi-lane freeways. Filthy water cascaded like actual waterfalls through the ceilings of luxury shopping malls directly onto high-end designer boutiques, while the runways of their state-of-the-art international airport were transformed into endless, murky seas. And it all happened simply because these so-called visionary managers decided they could play God and hack the weather without consequences. For years, they've been aggressively pumping chemical agents into the sky, repeatedly shooting the clouds to artificially induce rain to water their fake green parks. Yet they completely cheaped out on building basic storm drains, arrogantly assuming they'd never actually need them in a dry desert. And nature hit back with a brutal, undeniably graphic vengeance for that staggering arrogance. She showed them that all their hyped-up tech and bottomless oil wealth amounts to absolutely nothing but pathetic dust when stacked up against real elemental fury. Yet they carefully disguise this entire ecological hellscape under the banner of caring for our future. They host massive global climate summits. They grandstand at the podium about transitioning to green energy. But at the exact same time, they are relentlessly drilling new wells and pumping millions of barrels of crude every single day. Their heavily marketed so-called smart eco-cities of tomorrow are nothing more than tiny, laughable exhibition pieces. Plastic dioramas built to con naive investors, acting as a microscopic fig leaf trying to cover up a massive, lumbering, smog-choked, gas-burning monster. They are greedily sucking up the last drops of fresh water from rare underground aquifers that took millennia to form, draining them dry right before our eyes in a single generation. And one day, when the oil finally runs out, or when the climate shifts so radically that summer temperatures lock in above a deadly 140 degrees, which many scientists are already predicting, this glass fairy tale is going to shatter with a deafening crack. All those wealthy expats, all those trendy influencers and vloggers will instantly pack their designer leather luggage and bolt right back to their cool green home countries, leaving this mutilated, gutted, poisoned patch of earth to die in deafening silence. Those towering empty skyscrapers will be swallowed by thick drifts of burning salty sand. The abandoned artificial islands will finally slip beneath the dark water, and the desert will violently reclaim absolutely everything they so arrogantly and foolishly tried to steal from it. And that will be the most honest, poetic justice for this plastic civilization. A society that genuinely believed it was omnipotent, but totally missed one incredibly simple truth. You cannot bribe nature. Pull your phone out of your pocket, unlock the bright screen, and take a long, hard look at that little slab of glass and plastic you're so heavily attached to. You're used to treating it as your main trusted window to the free world, your private diary, and a completely secure lifeline to your loved ones. But the second you cross the invisible border into this glowing Arabian fairy tale, your indispensable gadget instantly morphs into the tightest, most ruthless, and most efficient digital leash ever slapped onto the neck of a willing slave. We are aggressively sold this polished myth of 100% safety on these sun-drenched streets. Wealthy tourists rave to their friends back home about leaving designer bags on outdoor cafe tables or leaving their luxury rental cars unlocked. But they have absolutely no catastrophic clue of the soul-crushing, paralyzing price paid every single day for this sterile, artificial street piece. This highly publicized security isn't built on some elevated civic culture or the magical wealth of a utopian society. It is nailed down by total, primal, bone-chilling terror and the most dense, paranoid state surveillance apparatus on the planet. This futuristic paradise of flying taxis and choreographed fountains is quite literally a massive, multi-billion-dollar digital concentration camp, heavily disguised as a high-end luxury mall. Their so-called smart city network, which they boastfully dub Falcon Eye, scans every single physical movement, every breath you take, and every averted glance, 24/7, without a millisecond of downtime. Hundreds of thousands of cameras, both hidden and in plain sight, rigged with bleeding-edge AI capable of instant facial recognition, even in a densely packed, fast-moving crowd, hang at every intersection, in every mirrored elevator, and down every dark alley. They know exactly where you went at dawn, who you secretly met up with last night, and precisely how many minutes you spent at a table in that overpriced restaurant. Every telecom provider in the country is a state-owned monopoly. They ruthlessly block any website they don't like, and they even throttle basic free internet calls just to force you to pay extortionate rates for official state cellular networks, and to make it as convenient as possible for local intelligence to wiretap your every word. You naively assume your private texts are safe behind complex end-to-end encryption? You're just a gullible kid, because local cyber police dump billions of dollars into buying the most invasive, aggressive, zero-click spyware from the world's top mercenary hackers, effortlessly cracking the phones of dissidents, the few remaining independent journalists, and even just regular disgruntled expat professionals. But this transparent glass dome is just the superficial tip of a rotting iceberg, because the most paralyzing, blood-curdling horror kicks in the second you open your mouth and utter a single wrong word out loud. Behind the glittering glass facades, the bleached, rehearsed smiles of service staff, and the neon signs of ultra-luxury European brands, hides a dark, savage, and merciless Middle Ages, where harsh 7th century religious doctrine strictly dictates the rules of survival in the 21st century. You can easily buy a gold-wrapped supercar. You can pop the rarest vintage champagne on a private beach. But the moment you post a single short tweet with the slightest, most harmless criticism of the local government, the police, or even just complain about municipal drainage after a heavy storm, your carefree luxury life will be terminated in exactly 15 minutes. The local cybercrime laws are drafted with such devilish, intentional vagueness that literally drawing breath can be spun into a major felony. Dropped an F-bomb in a WhatsApp text during a moment of road rage? That's hard jail time and a fine of tens of thousands of dollars. Uploaded a photo of a brutal highway pileup to warn other drivers? That is immediately classified as a severe threat to national security. Pack your bags, prepare for court, and expect instant deportation. Accidentally got a local in traditional white robes in the background of your street selfie without their notarized written consent? A squad of armed police is already en route to your location. This massive, vibrant crowd of high-earning American and European expats who relocated here for zero taxes and endless summers lives in a state of deep, quiet, suppressed social schizophrenia. They happily hit their loud, boozy Friday brunches, they dance in trendy nightclubs, and they try desperately to project an image of absolute freedom. But deep down, every single one of them harbors a cold, sticky, paralyzing dread, because they know the unspoken rules of this vicious game. They fully understand that this endless party is merely a temporary, highly fragile favor granted by an absolute monarch. A favor that can be violently revoked at any second, without a trial, without an investigation, and without the right to an attorney. This country organically rejects even the faintest, most ghost-like hint of dissent. Political parties are completely and unconditionally banned. There are zero independent labor unions to protect workers, and a free press mathematically cannot exist here. All local journalism boils down to endlessly rewriting nauseatingly sweet, sycophantic press releases about how yet another royal just inaugurated the world's largest flower bed or the world's tallest fountain. Any brave local human rights advocates who dared to even whisper about basic civil liberties were handed 10 or 15-year maximum security sentences in remote, baking desert prisons with zero AC long ago. And the state simply ordered society to forget them forever, erasing their names from history. You're strolling through a massive, marble-gleaming megamall, surrounded by the glowing storefronts of the most expensive fashion houses in Paris and Milan. Relaxing music is playing, but if you cave to basic human emotion and simply hug and passionately kiss your partner, right in the middle of this temple of unchecked consumerism. Muscular plainclothes security will materialize out of thin air and surround you. For a public display of genuine affection, you face very real prison time, public humiliation, and immediate deportation. Because beneath this glossy, high-end wrapper of Western consumerism lurks a rigid, uncompromising, and terrifying religious dictatorship. You're knocking back hard liquor in a luxury hotel restaurant, feeling like the master of the universe. But if you step out into the night air with a slight buzz and accidentally get into a minor argument with a local cab driver, your life is ruined once and for all. Because consuming alcohol without a specific government-issued license is a severe crime, and the local courts will show zero mercy. It is a constant, nerve-shredding tightrope walk directly over a bottomless abyss. And the most repulsive, stomach-churning part of this entire setup is the total, rotting hypocrisy of the global democratic establishment. Politicians in Washington and Brussels constantly throw tantrums about dictatorships in other parts of the world. They loudly slap harsh sanctions on anyone violating free speech. Yet here they happily shake hands with local royals, sporting massive fake smiles. They proudly open branches of their famous universities and pretend everything is totally fine. They effortlessly sell out their highly touted democratic values for cheap oil and massive sovereign wealth fund investments. You are cynically lured here by gorgeous, professionally shot fairy tales about limitless opportunity. You are given a split-second taste of big, easy money, but in return, they rigidly demand that you surrender your entire identity, your hunger for basic justice, and your fundamental human right to hold an independent opinion. You voluntarily agree to become a silent, obedient, endlessly grazing consumer locked inside the biggest shopping mall on the planet. A mall surrounded by a towering, impenetrable concrete wall, lined with machine gun watchtowers and night vision cameras. And as long as you smile wide, buy the newest designer drops, and post beautifully filtered photos to your socials, this illusion of sweet freedom will continue. But the second you trip up just once, the moment you display a normal human weakness or try to ask a direct, uncomfortable question, you will instantly, painfully discover firsthand just how cold, ruthless, and hard the concrete floor of a damp, solitary confinement cell can be. A cell securely hidden deep in the dark basements of this neon-lit, sun-drenched, futuristic paradise. Just take a look at the smug faces of those young tech bros, luxury real estate hustlers, and crypto gurus. They stare back at you so confidently from your phone screen. They loudly brag about relocating to this sun-drenched paradise. They scream to their followers about the zero-income tax lifestyle, claiming they're now living like legitimate millionaires. But they will never, ever tell you the truth. That those shiny golden handcuffs click shut around their wrists the exact second they step out of the international arrivals terminal. We are aggressively sold this fantasy of a frictionless life, where every other guy commutes in a red Ferrari and dines on fresh lobster on some man-made island. But the actual reality for a middle-class expat professional is a life lived in a state of deep, unbearable, daily panic. This flawless economic engine operates with a terrifying, diabolical cunning. The architects of this paradise engineered it specifically to ruthlessly siphon every last dime out of white-collar workers. You genuinely celebrate your tax-free paycheck, but within a month, you realize with sheer horror that the cost of living here just punches straight through the stratosphere and into deep space. Let's start with the absolute basics, renting an apartment. Back in the normal world, you pay month to month, but here, the brutal prehistoric laws of vulture capitalism reign supreme. The landlord of your concrete box in a glass high-rise demands a full year's rent up front, forcing you to write multiple massive post-dated bank checks. And right there lies the deadliest, most terrifying trap of this entire Arabian fairy tale. If a check bounces because your account runs dry, if it fails due to a bank glitch, or simply because you got fired out of nowhere, you instantly become a literal criminal. They don't just scold you for bad debt, they slap an immediate travel ban on you and freeze your bank account solid. you face a very real chance of being thrown into a sweltering, overcrowded local jail where nobody gives a damn about your polite excuses. This invisible guillotine hangs over the head of every single successful manager in a tailored suit. Now, toss that onto the bonfire of a wildly toxic culture of hyper-consumerism and endless flexing. This sticky, boiling air is literally saturated with the desperate need to flaunt your wealth to the world. In this city, it is physically embarrassing to just be a normal, modest human being. The system screams in your ear, buy the designer watch, finance a massive black SUV, drop thousands on VIP bottle service at a club where champagne costs as much as your kidney. And people are cracking en masse under this monstrous social pressure. They take out one loan, then a second, then they max out 5 different credit cards just to blow smoke in the eyes of other heavily indebted expats at a Friday brunch. They drain their last dollar to rent luxury cars just to shoot a 10-second reel for TikTok. And then they drive home to a cramped studio on the outskirts of town and eat the cheapest instant ramen they can find. It's an absolute epidemic of financial suicide. People willingly tie the noose around their own necks for the illusion that they belong to the ultra-elite. You hit the upscale gym, you pay an insane membership fee, you hustle relentlessly to match this plastic ideal, but every single day, the negative balance on your app just keeps plunging deeper. And this fragile house of cards balances on one single, razor-thin condition: your work visa. You are not a citizen, and you never will be, even if you live here for 40 years and drop millions into the economy. You are only allowed to breathe this air as long as you generate profit for your boss. If the company makes cuts tomorrow, or if your manager simply decides he doesn't like your face, the government shreds your visa with 30 days' notice. And that is when the true animalistic nightmare begins. You have exactly 1 month to secure a new job, or you are legally required to exit the country. But how on earth can you leave when you're saddled with a massive car loan, a pending rent check, and maxed-out credit cards? The border slams shut. People spiral into feral desperation. They abandon their luxury cars right in the airport parking lots with the keys still in the ignition, trying to smuggle themselves out through the desert just to escape a debt trap with no bottom. You can see thousands of high-end vehicles caked in thick baking sand, quietly rotting under the brutal sun in impound lots. Those aren't just quirky local landmarks. They are silent, haunting gravestones. Gravestones to the shattered lives of people who bought into this glossy fairy tale and lost absolutely everything. Walk across the marble floor of a mega mall while the soothing background music plays, and look closely into the eyes of these American, European, and Russian expats. There is no peace in those eyes. They are swimming in a dull, chronic anxiety. They can't ever truly relax. They can't make a solid 5-year plan because their entire existence dangles by a thread attached to someone else's mood. They surrender their best youthful years, their health, and their sanity to this merciless city. This place will wring them dry and then spit them out onto the curb with zero pension, zero social safety net, and zero right to a shred of empathy. It is indentured servitude wrapped in a bespoke Italian suit. The chains might be cast from solid gold, but they don't weigh a single ounce less. These imported professionals happily lock these cuffs on themselves. Blinded by the glare of foreign petrodollars, they are now forced to plaster a fake plastic smile of success on their faces every single day, so nobody guesses that they lie awake all night, paralyzed by a primal fear of tomorrow. And the most horrifying part of this entire story is that this conveyor belt of illusions never, ever stops. For every broken person who flees in terror or rots in a cell over bad debt, 3 more naive thrill-seekers looking for an easy ride land on the very next flight. They are practically begging to sell their freedom for a ghost of a chance to belong to this hollow, unforgiving world. The machine runs flawlessly, crushing human souls and emptying bank accounts, perfectly lubricated by elite marketing and raw greed. And it never, ever skips a beat. Take a walk through the endless, spotless halls of their most famous, outrageously expensive museums, which they so desperately try to pitch to the world as the new wonders of the modern age. You look at these majestic structures, drafted by greedy European architects, and you see Renaissance masterpieces by French and Italian legends hanging awkwardly on bare walls. But if you stop for just 1 second and actually tune into the vibe, you won't feel a single drop of living, breathing history. This nation attempted to pull off the most absurd, vulgar, and tragic transaction in the history of human civilization. They decided that with their bottomless piles of heavy petrodollars, they could just walk into a high-end boutique and buy a ready-made, profound national soul right off the rack. We are proudly shown their franchised version of the Parisian Louvre, dropped squarely into the scorching Arabian desert for hundreds of millions of dollars, while PR reps constantly lecture us on their deep devotion to high art. But the reality is that this art wasn't born in this sand. It didn't emerge from agony. It doesn't reflect the pain, the struggle, or the triumph of the local people. They simply won it at Sotheby's auctions to use as prestigious designer furniture for a wildly rich penthouse. They don't have their own great American novel equivalents to shake the world. They lack homegrown artistic geniuses whose canvases reshape consciousness. They possess absolutely zero organic culture that takes centuries to naturally root and evolve. A measly half-century ago, the exact ground where these blinding glass monoliths now stand was nothing but a brutal, dead, unforgiving wasteland. In that void, impoverished Bedouin tribes scraped by, migrating from one rare oasis to the next, while pearl divers routinely went blind and deaf in the salt water of the Gulf just to afford a crust of stale bread. That was their genuine, gritty, honest history of survival. But the very second that first fat geyser of black gold blew out of the dirt, they erased their past into fine dust with total, disgusted shame. They bulldozed their old clay homes, paved over their complex heritage with a thick layer of premium asphalt, and desperately tried to squeeze themselves into a shiny, plastic, rented tuxedo of global success. They import literally everything, from American pop stars lip-syncing for millions of dollars an hour at New Year's Eve bashes, to massive European soccer franchises, bought wholesale just to stroke their own sick, fragile egos. And this absolute cultural vacuum breeds a terrifying Frankenstein society, completely severed from any organic roots. You visit the so-called historic districts they market so aggressively to tourists, but you're actually just walking through a pristine movie set built from modern materials maybe 5 or 10 years ago. They artificially scratch and paint the walls to fake some age, hang up cute wooden lanterns trying to mimic an Arabian Nights fantasy. But it looks exactly as phony as a cheap cardboard castle at a local theme park. Authentic culture is never mandated from the top down. You can't just order it out of a thick catalog from a trendy Madison Avenue agency. It only grows in places where people love, suffer, fight for their civil rights, and make mistakes. But here, any free thought, any bold creative spark is instantly and mercilessly crushed by draconian censorship and strict religious laws. Any local indie filmmaker or poet who suddenly decides to honestly document the brutal lives of those voiceless Indian construction workers, or the deep suffering of women trapped behind the closed doors of luxury villas, will be shipped off on a very long business trip to a sweltering desert black site before they even finish typing page 1 of their script. And that is exactly why they only produce sterile, focus group-safe, dead cultural products. They shoot endless, nauseatingly sweet commercials featuring their royals gazing wisely into the future. They project massive laser shows onto the tallest skyscrapers on Earth, and they throw fireworks displays that shatter world records for cost and gunpowder. But inside all that noise and glitter, there is absolutely zero human meaning. It's just the hollow, deafening bang of a giant drum desperately trying to drown out the echoing silence inside. Their entire modern identity has been reduced to one single fetish: the loudest, most shameless display of hyperconsumption imaginable. They genuinely believe that if you drape a diamond chain over the neck of your hunting falcon, or if you drop $15 million on a single-digit license plate for your car, you automatically become a great visionary respected by the entire planet. But the international establishment, the same people smiling their fake smiles while selling them the yachts, the paintings, and the tech, secretly views them with massive, undisguised contempt. Old money aristocrats and Silicon Valley billionaires look at these new lords of the earth as simple lottery winners who suddenly hit the jackpot and just threw bespoke Italian suits over their traditional robes. They gladly take their cash. They flatter their wild ambitions at official galas, but they will never, ever truly let them inside their exclusive country club.
Because while it's incredibly easy to buy a Da Vinci painting, you cannot swipe a card to buy the centuries of cultural evolution that actually allowed a genius like him to be born. And the most bitter pill of all is how this gilded cage destroys their own local kids. The new generation of citizens, born long after the country had already drowned in oil money, have absolutely no clue who they actually are. They live in a bizarre world violently torn in half. On one side, their lives are dictated by rigid 7th-century religious doctrine, while on the other, they spend 24/7 doom-scrolling social media, drag-racing supercars, and consuming the most trashy pop culture imports. They have zero real-life goals. They never have to fight to survive. From the day they are born, the state hands them massive stipends, free mansions, and a blank check for any university on earth. This breeds a nation of profoundly infantile people who are chronically bored, exhausted by everything in existence, trying desperately to fill their internal void with cheap adrenaline, illegal street racing, and endless rounds of plastic surgery. They permanently lost the gritty, authentic wisdom of their Bedouin ancestors, people who knew how to survive a merciless desert and respected every single drop of water. In exchange, they got an unlimited black Amex card. This country strongly resembles a guy who hit a billion-dollar Powerball, bought the most expensive mansion on the planet, filled it with priceless antiques, but sits alone in the echoing living room every night with absolutely nothing to say to himself, because he is completely empty inside. And one day, when those massive reserves of black gold finally dry up, or when the world inevitably pivots to new energy sources, this artificial, store-bought culture is going to evaporate into the hot air like cheap cologne. It will leave behind nothing but lifeless museums, stuffed with foreign paintings, slowly being buried by the hot, unforgiving desert sand. And in that exact moment, the rest of the world will finally see that behind the golden facade, there was never anything more than a desperate, psychotic need to look better than they actually are. Try to rack your brain right now and name all 7 states of this nation that so proudly and pompously calls itself United. I can absolutely guarantee you'll stumble by the third name. The whole world only knows 2 words, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, because that's exactly where PR agencies dump billions of dollars to blind your eyes. But standing quietly and submissively behind those 2 fat, ultra-rich brothers are 5 poor, dusty, completely forgotten relatives that glossy travel magazines prefer to shamefully ignore. You rent a flashy car, drive outside the Golden Center, head north, and the fairy tale abruptly cuts out with a deafening crack, like some malicious guy just yanked the power cord from the wall. You cross the invisible border into the Emirate of Sharjah, and the glass skyscrapers instantly give way to endless, depressing, filthy concrete blocks that look exactly like the bleakest slums in the developing world. There are no choreographed fountains here, no artificial islands. There's nothing but gray, corrosive dust coating the facades of cheap high-rises. This country is not a single monolith at all. It is a brutal, feudal system where all the oil and all the real money sit directly under the boots of a single ruler in the capital, while the rest of the territories are left to literally survive on pathetic table scraps. The Emirates of Ajman, Al-Quwain, Ras Al Khaimah, and Fujairah are the massive, dark, dusty backyard of this glowing empire.
It's a dumping ground where they sweep all the dirty, ugly realities of life, securely locking them away so wealthy tourists never accidentally lay eyes on them. That is exactly where, inside those cheap concrete districts, the millions of ordinary blue-collar workers, cashiers, cab drivers, and low-level clerks live, because they physically cannot afford the astronomical prices of the golden cities.
Every early morning, when the clock hits just 4 or 5 a.m., the most massive and humiliating daily migration in modern history kicks off. Hundreds of thousands of exhausted people cram into beat-up sedans or packed filthy buses, hitting the main highway just to get to their jobs in the blindingly bright city center. That colossal multi-lane freeway morphs into an endless dead gridlock, a literal franchise of hell on scorching asphalt. People bleed away 3 or 4 hours of their lives just going one way, crawling slowly through thick exhaust fumes, suffocating in the heat because the ancient AC units in their cars simply can't handle the inferno. They arrive at work already hollowed out inside. They paste on fake plastic smiles. They serve rich vacationers in overpriced restaurants. And then, late at night, they jump right back into that exact same dead gridlock, just to return to their dark concrete box on the outskirts. It's an endless hamster wheel of pain and fatigue with absolutely no exit. And if you drive deeper into these northern territories, you'll witness raw, unfiltered poverty bordering on utter despair. You'll see the rusting skeletons of old cargo ships abandoned in the port long ago. You'll see dead construction sites where rusty cranes sit motionless for years because local sheikhs also wanted to play master builder, but simply ran out of cash, sending investors fleeing in panic. You'll walk down streets with zero proper sidewalks, where people are forced to walk directly on the asphalt, constantly dodging speeding freight trucks, because the urban infrastructure here was never built for human beings. It was built just to check a box on a government report. The air here reeks of cheap gasoline, street food grease, and garbage rotting in the sun, because municipal services in these parts don't run nearly as flawlessly as they do outside the luxury resorts. Drive past the northern mountains, and you'll see massive excavators mercilessly chewing through ancient rock. They dynamite the cliffs every single day to extract gravel and cement for the new towers down in the capital. All that heavy industrial dust hangs over the residential neighborhoods like a thick fog, settling deep in the lungs of locals, coating their cars and the cheap laundry strung up between buildings. People here suffer from chronic asthma and severe allergies, but nobody is building state-of-the-art medical clinics for them. There are no elite international schools where the kids of rich expats learn 3 languages. There are only underfunded, overcrowded classrooms where teachers grind it out for pennies. This is a literal industrial meat grinder, quietly pulverizing the health and lives of millions, just so wealthy tourists a couple of hours away can enjoy crystal clear air and pristine beaches. The local markets look like dirty bazaars from a bygone century, where unsanitary conditions are the absolute norm, featuring rows of crooked stalls hawking cheap plastic junk instead of high-end boutiques. The government in the capital loves to boast loudly to the globe about its space programs and Mars missions. Yet for decades, they stubbornly failed to install basic sewage systems or provide reliable electricity to some districts in their own northern provinces. When the summer power grid hits max capacity, these poor Emirates get hit with rolling blackouts. Just try to picture that primal horror. It's 115 degrees out. The AC and the fridge in your apartment suddenly die, and you're sitting in a dark, concrete oven, drenched in sweat, listening to your toddlers cry. But the local press is strictly forbidden from reporting this. Publishing that truth will get you thrown behind bars instantly. This entire massive, dusty, impoverished territory serves one single, deeply cynical purpose. It functions as a giant filter, a cheap holding pen for the expendable labor force the economy desperately needs, but strictly refuses to let live near the clean, elite zip codes. It is classic segregation, executed with absolute, chilling perfection. You can drive across the entire country in just a couple of hours, and you will witness this grotesque contrast firsthand, with your own 2 eyes.
On one side, you have palaces plated in solid gold. On the other, you have peeling gray walls, packs of emaciated stray cats, and mounds of construction debris tumbling down empty streets in the wind. And the most repulsive part of this whole setup is the sheer contempt the rich half of the country holds for its poor neighbors. Residents of the elite zip codes physically wrinkle their noses when they hear the names of the northern territories, treating them like some dirty plague, even though those exact, dusty, broke provinces supply the ultra-cheap labor that hauls away their trash, scrubs their cars, and cooks their food. It's a society rotting from the inside out with social inequality, where the value of a human life is measured entirely by the zip code on your lease agreement. And the next time you see another beautifully curated photo of a white sand beach, you absolutely need to know that just 60 miles down the road, hundreds of thousands of people are living in conditions closer to dystopian slums. They are trapped between a baking dead desert and a polluted sea, breathing toxic fallout from cement factories intentionally banished far from the capital just to keep the elite air pure. And they will live like that forever, because this system has zero upward mobility built into it for anyone stuck at the bottom of the food chain. The government burns insane cash buying up European sports franchises and sponsoring elite golf tournaments, all while turning a blind eye to the fact that their own citizens in remote districts sometimes lack access to safe drinking water. The illusion of wealth stops exactly where the funding to maintain it dries up. And just outside that artificial golden zone begins the harsh, filthy, genuine Arabian reality they try so desperately and so pointlessly to hide from the rest of the world behind towering billboards. Just open any major U.S. newspaper or flip on a flagship international news network, and you are guaranteed to see those beautiful, soothing green logos. They'll spoon-feed you incredible CGI renderings of futuristic glass towers drowning in lush tropical forests, while blissfully happy people cruise in silent EVs under a cloudless blue sky. Backed by massive PR war chests, we are aggressively conditioned to believe in this grand Arabian eco-revolution. The Emirates hire top-tier global marketing firms to scream 24/7 about how this petro-monarchy suddenly saw the light, heroically kicked its addiction to fossil fuels, and is now leading humanity toward a pristine, carbon-neutral future. But this glossy green mask hides the most cynical, brazen, and monumental lie of the 21st century. Let's rewind to that grandiose, surreal theater of the absurd they put on recently, when they hosted the world's biggest climate summit. The entire global establishment and all those stern eco-warriors obediently flew into a baking desert to discuss saving the planet. And who presided over this magnificent green summit? They officially appointed the CEO of their largest, most colossal state-owned oil company as the president. It completely defies human logic. It's literally putting a bloodthirsty wolf in charge of the sheep and naming him the chief expert on veganism. A man who personally oversees the extraction of millions of barrels of heavy crude every single day stood at the podium with a grave, concerned face, lecturing European ministers on how we all urgently need to slash atmospheric emissions. And the massive hall, packed with independent experts and journalists, obediently clapped along, because that applause was generously bought and paid for with gigantic investment contracts and backroom deals for new natural gas supplies. It was the triumph of absolute crystal-clear hypocrisy, the executioner throwing on a doctor's white coat and writing prescriptions for a patient slowly dying from poison. Now look at their flagship PR stunt, the infamous Masdar City, which they started building years ago and aggressively hyped as the world's first zero-emissions city. They dumped tens of billions of dollars into it, hired the trendiest British architects, and promised a technological Eden with zero cars and zero waste. You go there today, and you are met with an entirely empty, dusty, abandoned ghost town. Nobody actually lives there. There is zero real life. It's just a massive, insanely expensive, dead concrete movie set, slowly being buried under a thick layer of hot sand.
Their autonomous electric pods shuttle the rare tourist along incredibly short loops, while just outside this dead little patch of pseudo-ecology, giant thermal power plants continue to violently belch smoke into the sky. This city was always just a pretty diorama for global expos, a smokescreen to hide their true, ravenous nature. Their entire so-called green strategy boils down to buying up cheap solar panels from China, staging them in the desert for a cinematic drone shot, and then sprinting right back into their freezing, artificially over-chilled palaces. The real economy of this nation remains hopelessly addicted to the thickest, blackest oil needle on the planet. They haven't paused their drilling rigs for a single second. Worse, they are currently pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into massively expanding their oil and gas operations, planning to pump even more toxic fuel out of the Earth's crust in the coming decades. All this trendy chatter about green energy serves one single, highly pragmatic and sinister goal. They want to free up more crude oil to sell overseas, while nuclear and solar plants power the domestic grid. They are simply shuffling dirty money from one pocket to the other, but the total volume of carbon dioxide they are spewing into our planet's atmosphere is only surging higher with every passing day. And just look at their daily lives, their everyday habits that scream of a total primal contempt for the environment. Locals and wealthy expats move around exclusively in massive, ultra-heavy SUVs, burning gallons of gas just to shuttle the owner to the nearest megamall. They never turn their engines off in parking lots because they are absolutely terrified the cabin might warm up in 10 minutes. They don't just air-condition empty stadiums and endless malls. They blast heavy-duty outdoor AC units across open-air cafe patios. They literally try to air-condition the scorching desert wind itself, torching tons of fossil fuels in the process. This is a society of absolute, unhinged, hypertrophied hyperconsumerism that generates literal mountains of plastic waste every single day. They have virtually no real recycling culture. They just dump all those empty plastic bottles and packaging into gargantuan landfills deep in the desert, safely out of sight from the tourists. They fly in absolutely all their food on massive cargo planes from around the world, burning millions of tons of jet fuel just so their supermarkets are always stocked with fresh raspberries from Mexico and premium Wagyu beef from Japan. And despite all this catastrophic, monstrous damage to the planet, they have the absolute audacity to lecture the rest of the world on how to save the environment. It is the highest tier of cynicism when a country with one of the worst per capita carbon footprints on Earth simply buys the title of chief climate savior with cold, hard cash. They lavishly fund trendy eco-startups across Europe. They hand out green awards. They outright buy the loyalty of politicians in Washington and London. And this dirty scheme works completely flawlessly. The global establishment, the same people who love to preach about environmental rights and global warming, greedily snatches up those dirty petrodollars, no questions asked, while diplomats completely turn a blind eye to the fact that behind the beautiful green facade lurks a ravenous, insatiable oil monster. This monster pumps the black blood of the earth, poisons the Gulf with chemical runoff from its desalination plants, and slaughters ancient coral reefs just to dredge up new artificial islands for millionaires. And it covers up all this massive destruction with a thin, transparent green leaf bought from a high-priced PR agency in New York. And when this entire global lie finally collapses under its own weight, when the very real consequences of climate catastrophe brutally strike their own glass towers and flood their artificial palms, they will suddenly realize one terrifying thing. They will realize that no amount of money, no massive bribes to international commissions, and no beautifully shot television commercials can ever buy them a new, cool, and clean world. The exact world they so methodically and gleefully destroyed for decades, just for their own selfish, egotistical comfort. Just open any detailed political map of the world, zero in on the Middle East, and put your finger right on that tiny, blindingly bright diamond. Now, take a very close look at the nations forming a tight, suffocating ring around this heavily hyped oasis of absolute safety and endless economic partying.
For decades, we've been sold this beautiful, soothing myth that the United Arab Emirates is the Switzerland of the Middle East, a perfectly neutral, crystal peaceful, and incredibly secure safe haven where the world's billionaires can quietly park their mega yachts and stash their capital away from any global storms. But the brutal reality is that this colossal, incredibly fragile palace, made of thin glass and cheap plastic, was built squarely in the dead center of a massive, active volcanic crater that is starting to spew boiling lava right this very second. This country merely plays the role of a quiet, peaceful business hub, when in fact, the local elite has been deeply and violently entrenched in the bloodiest, most ruthless geopolitical games of this harsh region for years. They bleed astronomical sums, tens of billions in petrodollars, buying up the most advanced, lethal offensive weaponry from the United States and European powers. They hire ex-intelligence officers from Washington and London, retired special forces generals, and thousands of mercenaries from developing nations to do all their dirtiest, bloodiest wet work in neighboring shattered states. They actively, yet very quietly, bankroll civil wars. They deploy their tanks and combat drones into Yemen. They dive headfirst into complex, multi-layered conflicts, and they naively believe they can play God with foreign nations with total impunity, while their own citizens sip iced cappuccinos in luxury megamalls. But this arrogant, aggressive foreign policy carries a terrifying, unavoidable price tag that they will inevitably have to pay in full. Just try to wrap your head around the fundamental, baseline vulnerability of this entire glittering economy. Their absolute survival, all their artificial islands, their massive international airports, and their endless resorts literally hang by a thread on a few massive, highly complex, and completely exposed seawater desalination plants. In the event of any regional escalation, any serious military conflict, if even a single, cheap, garage-built suicide drone accidentally or intentionally strikes just one of those plants, this grand, glowing civilization will literally die of basic thirst in a matter of days. They have absolutely zero strategic freshwater reserves to last them months. Their holding tanks would run bone dry in a matter of hours, triggering total, animalistic panic, mass looting, and a biblical exodus of wealthy expats storming the airports in this baking concrete jungle. Now think about basic food security. This country imports over 90% of every single thing it eats. They fly in fresh fruit from Latin America, beef from Australia, and grain from Europe. If the Strait of Hormuz ever gets blockaded by warships or naval mines, the shelves of their gargantuan, polished supermarkets will be sucked down to an absolute echoing vacuum in exactly 2 short weeks. They have no fertile fields of their own, no ranches, absolutely nothing that could sustain human life without a continuous, non-stop conveyor belt of cargo ships and massive transport planes. This empire of consumption dangles from a razor-thin logistical umbilical cord that could be sliced open with a basic box cutter. And this threat isn't some hypothetical Hollywood doomsday script. It is already a harsh, blood-curdling reality. Just recently, the entire world watched in stunned silence as cheap drones and retrofitted missiles launched by Yemeni rebels easily punched right through their hyped-up air defense shield and struck oil facilities right in the capital, Abu Dhabi. 3 people were killed that day, and thick columns of black smoke billowed directly over the exact city that practically guaranteed its investors absolute invulnerability. In that split second, this entire crystal mirage shook to its very core. The authorities frantically scrambled in blind panic to cover up the scandal, strictly banning any photos on social media and threatening hard jail time for anyone daring to say out loud that their multi-billion-dollar Iron Dome was actually a leaky sieve. This country burns insane cash on American Patriot missile batteries. It builds U.S. military bases on its own soil. It desperately tries to buy an impenetrable security umbrella. But in the modern era of drone swarms and cheap hypersonic missiles, no amount of billions can buy a 100% guarantee. Literally just across the narrow, shallow Persian Gulf sits Iran, a massive, heavily armed geopolitical heavyweight that, in the event of any direct clash with the US and its allies, would vaporize those glass Emirati towers into fine silica dust in the first 20 minutes of the conflict.
The local rulers are acutely aware of this primal terror, which is exactly why they so feverishly, with such heavily plastered fake smiles, try to play best friends with absolutely everyone at the same time. They shake hands with Israeli politicians in the morning and sign historic peace accords. By lunch, they are swearing eternal loyalty to American senators, and by nightfall, they are quietly ushering high-ranking Russian or Chinese officials through the back door, helping them dodge global sanctions and stash shadow capital. They don't just hire grunt mercenaries. They buy up the absolute best cyber spies and former US intelligence analysts to build top-secret hacking units for them. They violently breach the phones of journalists, human rights defenders, and the leaders of neighboring countries, ruthlessly shredding every conceivable international law. They genuinely think their endless cash and slick diplomatic gymnastics will forever shield them from the firestorm that is slowly but surely boiling over across the entire Middle East right now. But in the cutthroat arena of global politics, you cannot play both sides of the fence forever, especially when that fence is soaked in gasoline. The global establishment that so eagerly sells them weapons and builds their museums today will, in the event of an actual major war, instantly sacrifice this desert appendage, evacuating their high-value citizens on military transports and leaving the local elite entirely alone to face their enraged neighbors. This entire investment paradise, all these international financial hubs and incredible free economic zones are built on the most skittish, cowardly substance on the planet. Capital demands absolute silence, and the very second the first genuine air raid siren howls in the sky over Dubai or Sharjah, the moment the first oil tanker erupts in the Gulf, all those trendy crypto bros, Russian oligarchs, and European executives will instantly swipe their cards for million-dollar one-way tickets and flee forever. And this grand, glittering, heavily air-conditioned empire will be left completely hollowed out, stranded direct alone with its dead geography and heavily armed enemies. They built their opulent golden castle squarely on top of a powder keg, carefully ran dozens of short fuses right to it, and now they just sit at the very top of that keg, sipping artisanal coffee, scrolling their feeds, and praying with childish naivety that not a single stray geopolitical spark will ever drift into their sterile, perfectly polished oasis. But history never, ever forgives this kind of phenomenal, blinding arrogance. When this bloody Middle Eastern knot is finally pulled tight and snaps, this territory, which lacks a strong domestic army of motivated citizens, lacks any strategic depth, and lacks even basic reserves of food and water, will simply collapse into oblivion faster than any other player in the conflict. And their beautiful, hollow, towering glass skyscrapers won't stand in the desert as monuments to the triumph of human genius, but as massive, glittering, scorched tombstones of an era when people naively believed they could permanently buy peace in the dead center of history's oldest meat grinder. Just close your eyes for a second and picture an old-school hourglass. You watch it, and you see those tiny, dry grains of sand slowly, but absolutely inevitably, slipping straight to the bottom. That quiet, monotonous sound is ticking away the final decades of this flashy, plastic Middle Eastern miracle right now. We are preached to with almost religious fervor that they've built the ultimate city of the future. They swear this place will permanently glow on the covers of high-end travel magazines and pull in millions of starstruck tourists forever. But the brutal truth of history is that they merely pitched a luxurious, insanely overpriced temporary tent directly in the path of a colossal, merciless hurricane. This entire mammoth empire of glass and steel relies exclusively on two incredibly fragile pillars: a bottomless pipeline of dirty petrodollars and a 100% fail-proof artificial life support system. And the exact millisecond one of those elements suffers a catastrophic failure, this fairy tale ends so fast and so violently that the rest of the world won't even have time to blink. The age of oil is relentlessly speeding toward its historic finale. The world is frantically, desperately scrambling for alternative energy. Automakers are going all in on EVs, and megacorporations are slowly pivoting away from fossil fuels. And when that thick black vein finally runs completely dry, or when crude prices crash to laughable lows, this carnival of hyperconsumption will instantly suffocate. They have absolutely zero fundamental backup plans for survival. All their heavily hyped investment funds, their international banking hubs, and massive tourist clusters are just pretty paper facades stacked directly over one single deep oil well. Capital is the most cowardly force on Earth. The very second investors realize the party is over, they'll tap one button on their smart devices and pull absolutely all their trillions of dollars out. Millions of wealthy expats, all those elite managers, trendy influencers, and crypto bros will instantly pack their designer luggage. In a state of feral panic, they'll dump their financed red sports cars right in the long-term parking lots at the international airports. They will swipe their cards for one-way tickets at any insane price and fly back to the US, Europe, or Asia forever. And this massive, hyper-dense city will empty out in a matter of days, as if all the life was violently vacuumed right out of it. And then, the true, original, and rightful owner of this land will take over. Nature doesn't do pity. She doesn't take bribes, and she doesn't sign peace treaties with royals. Without the 24/7 roar of those massive desalination plants, the water in these glass towers will vanish instantly. Without a colossal burn of energy, the industrial AC grids will shut down forever. The temperature inside those luxury glass skyscrapers will literally rocket to 150 degrees in a couple of hours. They will turn into giant baking ovens, where taking a single breath is physically impossible. Elevators will freeze between floors, pumps will die, and those massive choreographed fountains will become dry concrete pits filled with trash. And then the sand will march in from the desert. That fine, acidic dust will methodically bury the wide, empty boulevards. Millimeter by millimeter, it will swallow up abandoned exotic cars and the gold-plated storefronts of designer boutiques. Scorching winds will blow out the expensive floor-to-ceiling windows in empty luxury penthouses. Aggressive, salty humidity from the Gulf will rapidly and mercilessly eat away at the steel skeletons of the tallest super-talls. You naively think these monoliths will stand for thousands of years like the ancient Egyptian pyramids? You are dead wrong. Modern materials, this cheap plastic, this thin glass, and this commercial steel, surrender incredibly fast when slammed by aggressive sea salt and wild temperature swings. Those world-famous artificial islands, the ones they poured so much blood into and destroyed half the Persian Gulf for, will simply slide right back under the waves. Without fleets of expensive dredging ships working daily, without constant coastal reinforcement, the ocean will easily and quickly wash away that stupid, sandy vanity project. Nature will scrub this arrogant human mistake off her face for good, and an absolute, echoing, dead silence will fall. In just a pathetic 100 or 200 years, a few brave explorers will wander through these colossal ruins. They'll stare up at the rusting skeleton of the tallest tower on Earth, half buried in a boiling sand dune. They'll roam the pitch-black hallways of former elite megamalls, listening to the hot wind kick around dry leaves and scraps of old billboard ads. And they will absolutely ask themselves one single question. Why? Why did an entire nation get handed such unimaginable, fantasy-level wealth, only to spend it not on saving our planet, not on massive scientific breakthroughs, not on cutting-edge medicine or deep space exploration? They simply took it all and built the world's largest air-conditioned shopping mall in the deadest, most lifeless spot on the entire globe. It will stand as the most grandiose, vivid, and terrifying monument to human greed and impenetrable stupidity in the entire history of our civilization. It will be a tombstone for a society
that religiously believed it could buy off the laws of physics with cold, hard cash. A society that built its fleeting triumph on the bones of millions of nameless slaves from impoverished nations, on a murdered ecosystem, and on total state-sponsored lies. This Arabian fairy tale was blindingly bright. It dazzled the eyes and drove millions of naive people around the world absolutely crazy. But the end of this fairy tale will be quiet, dusty, and completely inglorious. The sand in that old hourglass is falling. Every new grain relentlessly brings that exact moment closer. The desert will simply sigh, close its ancient eyes, and permanently digest this foolish golden mirage, leaving not even a fleeting memory behind. And this isn't the prophecy of some crazy doomsday fatalist. It is cold, mathematically precise, and absolutely inescapable reality. They are trying so desperately and so pointlessly to buy their way out of it with their endless petrodollars. But time does not accept that currency.